It's not uncommon to hear a triple beep and have your PlayStation 3 shut down, and you might have even caught yourself becoming annoyed afterwards. Being unfamiliar with common issues will be quite helpful to Sony, who wants you to send the console into their repair services rather than attempt to fix it yourself, potentially destroying it in the process. And if they still offer this option, I suggest you take it. But as of 2022, the PlayStation 3 was officially abandoned by Sony. They no longer accept them for repair. We're on our own. The first thing I do when I get a new console is assign a unique identifier and then start a repair log, so I can keep notes. I inspect the shell for scuffs, cracks, dents, visible port damage, the presence of the warranty seal, and whether or not the top cover has been broken into. I'm looking for evidence of drop damage, abuse, neglect, or intentional efforts to conceal previous repair attempts. I record anything noteworthy, then I proceed with disassembly.
Disassemble! Dead! No, disassemble! Please, escape!
Oh my god.
Inside the console, I'm looking for signs it's been opened. Broken or intact cable retention stickers, creases in the ribbon cable, marred screws, reworked stickers, and notes left from previous repair techs. Is there a lot of dust? Bugs? On early models, I look for this weather-stripping foam attached to the heatsink. It'll usually be broken if the heatsink has ever been separated from the RF shield. I make note of the condition of the thermal paste. Is it the original white stuff? Still wet? Is it dried or pumped out? How's the spread? Have the heat spreaders been delidded? Were there any foreign objects? Is there any physical damage on the motherboard? Missing components, scratches, scorching, discoloration, water damage, corrosion, rust, tar, or films? Is there an odor, like cigarette smoke or propylene glycol from vape juices? Basically, I'm looking for anything that builds a picture of the console's history. It may explain what happened. Then I proceed to UART diagnostics. This tutorial gives viewers an overview of system control basics. We'll cover what is SYSCON, who do we think, and basics of SYSCON access. So if you're ready, let's get started. What is SYSCON? When I started fixing PlayStation 3s, I had no idea where to start, but now I do, and so do you. Here. SYSCON is short for System Control. Sony's included a system controller chip on every console starting with the PlayStation 2 up to the PS5 at the time of this video. They're handhelds too. PSP and Vita. Basically, it's the all-seeing eye of the PS3. If anything goes wrong at startup or during operation,
hit enter again.
It'll shut down the console and generate an error code.
Oh.
That sound triggers rather bad memories for anyone that's experienced a yellow light of death.
It had a 1002 in the power on state. So yeah, that was a fairly long yellow light of death.
Which is what we call the LED pattern fat model consoles throw when there's a general hardware fault. My buddy NASCAR pointed out that the 2000 model Slim has a yellow LED just like the fat models, but the 2100 doesn't have a yellow LED, it just flashes red. And the 2500 models don't even generate a triple beep or flashing red LED. They just shut off, which looks like a power supply issue, and people misdiagnose that all the time. We speculate that's because Sony was trying to distance themselves from the moniker we gave general hardware errors, so people wouldn't think they got the infamous yellow light of death, which of course they did, they just didn't associate the two anymore. Regardless of how Sony indicates a general hardware fault, when it happens, the SYSCON generates an error code and stores up to 32 of them in onboard EEPROM. And there are other useful commands, like reading temperature sensors, usage time, creating custom fan tables, turning the console on and off remotely, and more. If we could just gain access, we could use these codes to diagnose and repair consoles. Who knows what else? But in Sony's infinite wisdom, this SYSCON is encrypted, locking us out. But that was about to change. Who do we think? In the fall of 2019, PSX Place developer Zikaksao obtained the SYSCON firmware key. This was the result of 10 years of work. And in the summer of 2020, PSX Place member DB260179 started a SYSCON diagnostic thread in which he passed on this sacred knowledge, presenting a tutorial and script that allowed us to finally access its hallowed inner workings. We could now enter the PS3's inner sanctum and control it from the inside. He has a written tutorial on his GitHub page, but it's geared mainly towards Linux users, and there were some issues Windows users ran into, myself included. So I wrote a Windows tutorial. But for most people, a video is easier. So here we go. Basics of SYSCON access. Disclaimer. While this is pretty safe and easy, the tools and process involve risk. If you proceed, you do so at your own expense. Please watch the entire tutorial first before attempting, so you have an idea of what to expect. It's split into two sections. If your console turns on, you can use PS3toolset.com to retrieve the error log without opening it. If it doesn't turn on, you have to use a UART adapter to communicate with the SYSCON directly, which requires you to open the console and disassemble it down to the motherboard. Let's start with the first scenario.
If your console turns on, or you can get it to turn on long enough, make sure that your date and time is set properly. So go ahead and set it via the internet. So you're going to need a Wi-Fi, or I would recommend an Ethernet connection because it's faster. So set via internet. Now open a web browser. So press triangle, go to Tools, go down to Homepage and use blank page. Okay, now go back, press triangle again, go to Tools, go down to Delete Cookies, yes, Tools, Delete Search History, yes, Triangle Tools, Delete Cache, yes, Tools, Delete Authentication Information, yes. Now quit, and then start back in. Okay, now press Start to bring up a web page. Press square to delete, and then go to PS3 Toolset.com. It's .com, not .org. Okay, PS3Toolset.com. Enter. And then when this dialog box comes up, hit yes. This can take a little bit here.
If it gives you an error, close the internet browser and restart the console. Then try again.
Okay, it's successful. I heard a triple beep. That's normal. We'll go ahead and say, okay, up here in the System Manager tab, click that. Okay, see, it's getting the data from the flash.
Scroll down to the bottom of the System Information list. There you can find usage time and the error log. Take a picture of this screen, but be sure to hide your PSID and IDPS. Those can be stolen and are often sold on eBay to cheaters that want to get the console back on PSN. I've asked Bewareville to automatically hide sensitive information so that people don't inadvertently post pictures online. They would have to expand the list to see them. He may have already done so by the time you watch this. Just be aware there's sensitive information listed here, so be careful what you share online.
This is what you want to know, this error log here. So expand that, and you can scroll down and see what your error history has been. If you want to take a picture and you want to ask for help, just kind of scroll this down so that you can't see any of the information above it, and take a picture of the screen like this. You can only see about 20 of them, so make sure to take a second picture, scrolling all the way down for the last few.
Alright, what about the second scenario? If your console doesn't turn on, you'll have to use a serial to USB adapter to communicate with the SYSCON instead. Required materials. You'll need a USB to TTL serial adapter. It must be 3.3 volts or settable to 3.3 volts. The adapter I use did not require any special drivers. It was automatically recognized. Other adapters may require drivers or manual setup. You'll also need wire to connect the SYSCON test pads. I recommend male to female jumper wires. One end has a male pin connector that's great for the USB adapter I have. The other end has a female connector great for other popular USB adapters that have male pins instead. You can just cut off the end of the side that you don't need and solder that end to the RX, TX, and Diag pins. You might need to get a longer wire for that type of adapter, or just use a USB extension cable to reach your computer. You're going to need a soldering iron and tips. The UART diagnostics can be done with a clothespin and needles, but if you're going this far to diagnose the console, I assume you're hoping to fix it, and most issues will require soldering that's much more difficult than attaching these 3 wires. So if you're afraid of soldering, you frankly shouldn't be working on this console at all. Procedure. Solder a wire to the RX, TX, and Diag test pads, if your board has it. Their location varies based on motherboard revision. After disassembling your console, make note of which motherboard revision you have and use the following pictures to find the test pad you need to solder to. Also note that there are 2 types of SYSCON chips, Mullion and Sherwood. The commands needed to access them differs. Mullion SYSCONs have an external and internal access mode. The list of commands you can use differs based on which mode you're in. Internal mode offers more control, but requires the Diag wire be grounded. You also have to edit a bit and fix a checksum afterwards to enable it. Sherwood SYSCONs don't have an external mode. They don't require editing the bit or grounding a Diag wire, so those motherboards don't even have a Diag test pad. It's just 2 wires.
I like to lop off one end, lop off the end, tin them up. We need this side of the board. Picture here to help me out. The upper one. Red is never used. That's 5 volts. Don't want to send that in. White to white. And we wait to do Diag, black wire, until after enabling internal access.
Follow the link in the description to download the SYSCON script. Also download the latest version of Python. Unzip the SYSCON script, and then delete the zipped folder. We don't need that anymore. Right-click the Python installer, and then select Run as Administrator. In the setup, check the box Add Python to Path. This will allow you to use a Windows command terminal to access the SYSCON. Now open a command terminal as an administrator. On Windows 10, you can just search CMD, then right-click the app and choose Run as Administrator in the drop-down box. You need to install some dependencies now. Type in pip space install space py serial. Then pip install PyCryptoDome X. Follow the prompts if there are any. When I did this the first time, it prompted me to update and explained how to do it. So just follow instructions. You should get a message confirming a successful install after each command. These dependencies must be installed or the SYSCON script won't work. Also, you'll get errors about Python not being recognized if you didn't check the box to add Python to path when you installed it. Now you're ready to gain access to the SYSCON. Plug the UART adapter into your computer. Be sure your adapter is set to 3.3 volts. Otherwise, you could destroy the SYSCON and your console. Navigate to Device Manager and find which COM port Windows assigned the USB adapter. On Windows 10, you can just search for Device Manager, then look under Ports for the USB adapter. Mine was named Prolific USB to Serial COM Port COM7. That's what I'll need to put into the command line to gain access to my SYSCON. First, connect RX and TX wires. Do not connect Diag. Connect ground on your USB UART adapter to the ground on the PS3. Do not ground Diag yet. Leave it unconnected for now. We're just grounding the USB adapter to the console. The RF shield is the most convenient place to get ground to the USB adapter, or the copper ring around the perimeter of the motherboard. Alligator clips work great. You do not need to solder a connection. This is just to be sure the computer and PS3 are sharing the same ground reference. It's not strictly necessary, but a good practice. Be sure that the power supply is plugged in to both 5V and 12V connectors. Technically, the 2-prong 12V connector is not needed to power and access the SYSCON, but if you attempt to start the console without 12V, you'll get an error. Just be aware of that. Flip the power rocker if your PS3 has one. Otherwise, plug it in so that the standby LED illuminates. Open the folder containing the SYSCON Python script you downloaded earlier. At the top of the window, there is a file path box. Click on the file path and it'll highlight. If you type in cmd, it will open a command terminal with that folder already mounted. This saves you the trouble of manually changing the directory. Now you are ready to enter the command string needed to run the Python script. Here's an example. This is the command needed to run the script, but you also need to tell it which COM port the USB adapter is in. You referenced that earlier.
Mine was COM7.
Now we need to use the proper command for the type of SYSCON we have. For Mullion SYSCON, CXR is external mode, CXRF is internal mode. For Sherwood SYSCONs, you just type SW. There is no internal or external mode for Sherwoods. The procedure for the Sherwood SYSCON is basically the same as what I'm about to show you, but you can skip the part about internal mode. First, we have to connect to it via external mode. So my script would be PS3 SYSCON UART script.py COM7 CXR. If everything worked, you'll just see this, and the cursor will be flashing. Be sure to check your COM port, your connections, that the console's powered and the red standby LED is illuminated. Now type AUTH, auth, in uppercase.
Work. Why?
It is case sensitive, so if one doesn't work, try the other.
Hey, I'm in.
If you get auth1 response invalid after trying it both ways, then you got the RX and TX wires reversed. Turn off the console and switch the wires around. This time, it should say auth successful. If you can't get it to auth no matter what you do, then check the connection to the motherboard very carefully. Sometimes the pads or traces can tear. Once you auth in, now you can use external commands.
Okay, that worked.
The one you're most likely interested in is error log get 00. This will return the most recent error that the SYSCON recorded. Error log get 01 returns the second most, 02 retrieves the third most, and so on. But it's hexadecimal, so after 09, the 11th code is 0A, not 10. Error log get 10 is actually the 17th code. Luckily, you don't have to retrieve them all one at a time. You can copy the code I've linked in the SYSCON tutorial on the PSX place, and then paste them into the command terminal. It will run all of them one after another. Sometimes it will give you an error on one or two of them. Just make sure that there's not a space and try it again. But I have noticed that sometimes it just doesn't want to retrieve them. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's a weak connection or something. Just a little tidbit to be aware of. After the last code is displayed, hold Shift and Up to highlight the text in the command terminal. Then press Ctrl-C to copy it. Open Notepad and paste the code there. Then save it so you have a record of the console's error log. Note, this error log only holds 32 errors, so if you do a bunch of testing, each new error will force the oldest error off the end of the log. This error log is a record of the console's history and can be useful to piece together a story about what happened, so it's best not to test the console a bunch of times before saving it. Instead, retrieve the error log first thing after experiencing a YLOD of death, to avoid losing important clues. Limitations of external mode. The error codes are followed by a timestamp. However, timestamps are in a weird format when retrieved using external access mode, so you don't know when the errors occurred. You can tell if they occurred at the same time if the characters match, though. That can be helpful. Timestamps are a big piece to a console's history. If you gain internal access, they will show the date and time each error occurred. So that's one good reason. Other reasons include commands that you don't have access to. Internal mode allows you to use BE count, which displays the usage time, shutdowns, bring ups, total uptime, and bring up, which shows more information about the power on self-test, and if anything goes wrong, it can give you useful clues to help you figure out what and when. So here's how to access internal mode, which unlocks more commands and controls. Auth into external CXR mode as you did before. Then issue the following command. EEP get 396101, which should return FF.
All right, so it's FF currently.
FF means internal mode is currently disabled. That's the default value. Now type EEP set 39610100. This changes the byte to allow internal access mode. Be very careful that you're only changing address 3961. Double check that you didn't accidentally type in the wrong numbers. To verify it changed correctly, type EEP get 396101. It should now return 00 if the bit was changed successfully. If so, shut off the console.
Console off.
Connect the diag wire to ground.
Plug in diag.
And turn the console back on.
Power on.
It will beep 3 times and start flashing.
This is normal.
Because the checksum doesn't match anymore. Don't be alarmed, we're going to fix that now. Close the command prompt and reopen it. In order to connect the SYSCON now, we need to use the internal command CXRF.
CXRF this time.
Then type auth.
Auth in.
It should say auth successful. If so, you're in.
Okay, let me in. Perfect.
Now use the command EEPCSUM. This will return addresses that don't match the checksum. The address you need to change is the line after the sum line. Only the sum line indicates where a mismatch occurred. Ignore all the other lines. It's the one directly after the sum that matters. It'll tell you it should be something like 0F38. This is just an example though. Don't copy what I write. Write what your checksum mismatch is telling you it should be.
Right, 39 FE, and it's bit swapped, so this should be 5073. Right, so it's saying it should be 7350,
but because of endian byte swapping,
we need to change that to 5073. So that's the correct checksum to fix. Enter. Fixed.
Now type EEPCSUM again. If the checksums match now, then the sum line will not be there. Ignore all the other should be lines. If the sum line is gone, then the checksum matches and the console will start normally now.
So that line with sum 100 there, that's gone. So we fixed the checksum. All right, so now I can turn it off. And then back on again. And now it shouldn't flash. And no triple beep. Solid, it's good. We can auth into internal mode now.
From this point on, you're going to need that diag wire and use CXRF to connect to the SYSCON. Now you can use useful internal commands like last error log, bring up, power state, error log, and more.
Off. Successful. We are into internal mode. All right, so what I want to see here is error log, and I want to save that. What's different about this error log is that it has the date of all the errors. So paste that there. I also want the BE count. Okay, so that tells me how long the console's been used. 1,139 days. I have never seen one that big. I do believe that is a new record. That's pretty crazy. I don't necessarily need a bring up because error log shows the last error was a 1002 in the power on state at 80. So what this means is that the console is going to turn on and then it's going to have a NEC token issue. But I will go ahead and do a bring up just for posterity. It has the IHS, but no heat sinks, so it'll overheat pretty quickly. What I want to do is turn it off right after I turn it on. So here we go.
If there is an error,
Bring up.
it can provide useful information about when and where the error occurred.
Hit enter again. Shut down. Oh, it overheated before I could. I assume it overheated. No, it had a 1002 in the power on state. So yeah, that was a fairly long yellow light of death. That was at least, what, 4 seconds or so? I'm gonna do that one more time and time it. I'm gonna do shutdown. That will clear the code. So that cleared the code. And now I can do another bring up.
The command terminal will show a log of the power on sequence, but it will stop after a few lines and wait. If you hit enter again after a few seconds, more information from the startup log will show.
And there it goes. Shut down. And it was a 1002. Let me grab those bring ups and then save those. All right, I'm going to save this as PS3 number 27. I do this with every console when I first get it, even before doing the first power on, because I want to get all of the codes off of it to begin with before I even do a power test like I just did. And also when I do that first power test, I want to have this record of the bring up. So you see how the bootloader started? Like if it's going to fail the power on self-test, it's going to be in here and you're going to see some information about these SSM states. I want to save this because this is useful for me. As we saw, this console has over 1,000 days of use. Those codes are related to the tokens. The tokens have literally well exceeded their specification of 1,000 hours at 105 degrees Celsius, which would come out to way less than 1,000 days of use. So these puppies did their job. Good job, NEC. I'm gonna have to say that these capacitors, they were not defective. They worked great. They just got old and they died. So now they need to be replaced.
For Sherwood SYSCON, the procedure is basically the same. Solder the RX and TX pads. I'm just double checking which prong is ground. And that's ground. Plug in the UART adapter. Power the console into standby and run the Python script with the correct COM port and using Sherwood this time, SW. Auth in lowercase. If it returns auth1 response invalid, try auth uppercase. If that doesn't work, switch the RX and TX wires around and try again. You can see me doing that here. If you try to connect without grounding the motherboard to the UART adapter, you might not be able to auth in, or if you do, you'll have issues with commands not being recognized or inconsistent results. Maybe. Not always, but sometimes. Grounding your UART adapter to the motherboard like I'm doing here with alligator clips makes it easier for signals to get through. Sherwood doesn't have a diag wire. You don't need to change a byte to enable internal mode. It only has one mode, which is different than Mullion SYSCONs. Some commands are the same as internal mode, like error log, so that's the most important thing to get. But to access the list of commands it has available, type help. Bring up is the same though, so I'll do that next. I type shutdown to clear the error to return to standby so I can do another bring up. I'm looking for the power on self-test diagnostic information, which shows errors during the power on sequence, which may be helpful to narrow down the list of subsystems involved. Then I save this information in my repair log. The last thing I want to say before ending the video tutorial is the preferred way you should submit your SYSCON logs when asking for help on the PSX place. Copy your error log, follow the link in the description to go to the SYSCON help thread, then scroll to the bottom and start a post. Look for this icon and insert your error log as code. This makes it a lot easier for us to see what your errors actually were, and you won't make any mistakes typing errors in incorrectly. It also allows the error log to be indexed by the search function of the website, whereas if you post a picture of your error log, well, it can't index the picture, so you won't get a return when you're searching for an error code using the search box. If everyone posted their codes this way, it would be easier to find relevant information. The SYSCON error logs are a powerful new tool in the PS3 repair toolbox, but you still need to work through the problem methodically to solve it. Hopefully you now know where to start, and we're not just guessing. Alright, that's it. Go forth and resurrect your console.